The most famous betrayal in history. The true face of Brutus revealed. A death that shook Rome. On the Ides of the 4th of March 4 BCE, the heart of the Roman Republic stopped beating. The great Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and risen to become Rome's most powerful leader, lay bleeding on the cold marble floor of the theater of Pompeii. 23 stab wounds marked his body. Senators fled in panic. The streets of Rome echoed with rumors. But among all the men who struck that day, one name would echo through history above all others: Marcus Junius Brutus. He was not just another conspirator. He was the one Caesar trusted most, the man he loved as a son. And yet, on that fateful day, Brutus stood among the assassins. Why? Was Brutus a patriot who sacrificed friendship to save the Republic? Or was he a traitor driven by ambition and fear? To understand, we must go back, not to the Ides of March, but to the very beginning of Brutus's life. Part 1. The birth of a conspirator. Marcus Junius Brutus was born in 85 BCE into one of Rome's most prestigious families. His lineage carried both glory and shadows. His father, Marcus Junius Brutus the Elder, was a respected senator, until he was executed by none other than Pompey the Great during Rome's turbulent civil wars. His mother, Servilia, was an influential and cunning woman from the powerful Junia family. Servilia would later become the mistress of Julius Caesar himself, a relationship that gave young Brutus a special place in Caesar's affections. Some whispered that Caesar's fondness for Brutus went beyond politics, that perhaps Brutus was his illegitimate son. Whether true or not, this bond would make the betrayal all the more shocking. From a young age, Brutus was educated in philosophy, rhetoric, and the ideals of the Roman Republic. He studied under renowned scholars in Athens, where he immersed himself in the works of Plato and Aristotle. He spoke often of virtue, justice, and liberty values that would later become both his justification and his curse. Part 2. The rise of Caesar's protege. In the chaotic years of civil war, Brutus navigated dangerous political waters. At first, he sided with Pompey, the very man who had killed his father out of loyalty to the Senate's cause. But after Caesar's decisive victory at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Brutus chose to submit to Caesar's mercy. To everyone's surprise, Caesar not only spared Brutus, but welcomed him into his inner circle. He appointed him governor of Gaul, honored him with political offices, and spoke of him as a man of integrity. Caesar's trust was absolute. Yet beneath the surface, the Senate's old guard whispered. They saw Caesar's growing power as a threat to the Republic. He had been declared dictator for life. Statues of him rose in the Forum. His face appeared on coins. To many senators, Rome was sliding into monarchy, and Brutus, with his republican ideals, was standing too close to the man who might destroy it. The question was not if a plot would form, but when. Part 3. The conspiracy takes shape. The year was 44 BCE. Rome was uneasy. Caesar's victories had brought peace, but it was a peace built on one man's power. To the defenders of the old republic, this was no peace at all. It was the beginning of tyranny. A group of senators began meeting in secret. They called themselves liberatores, the liberators. Among them were seasoned politicians like Gaius Cassius Longinus, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, and Trebonius. But the man they needed most was Marcus Junius Brutus. Why Brutus? Because he was the living symbol of the Republic's ideals. His family claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had driven out Rome's last king centuries earlier. If Marcus Brutus joined the plot, the assassination would not be seen as murder. It would be seen as a noble act to save Rome. At first, Brutus hesitated. Caesar had spared his life, honored him, and trusted him above all others. But Cassius, a master manipulator, worked tirelessly to convince him. He reminded Brutus of his heritage, his duty, and the dangers of absolute power. He whispered that Caesar's ambition would end the Republic forever. And so, torn between loyalty to a friend and duty to an ideal, Brutus made his choice. He would strike Caesar down. The plan was set for the Senate meeting on the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 BCE. In the theater of Pompey, far from the safety of the forum, Caesar would be surrounded by conspirators. No guards, no army, only senators. Part 4. The Ides of March. The morning of the 15th of March dawned with omens. Ancient writers tell us Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of his statue bleeding from 100 wounds. The soothsayer Spurinna had warned him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar almost stayed home, but Decimus Brutus, another conspirator, arrived to escort him. Laughing off the warnings, Caesar agreed to go. When he entered the Senate chamber, the conspirators closed in. They pretended to present petitions, surrounding him in a tight circle. Then, in a sudden frenzy, Tullius Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down from his shoulders. The first blow came from Casca, slashing at Caesar's neck. Chaos erupted. Blades flashed in the dim light. Caesar tried to fight back, but the circle was too tight. The daggers, too many. And then he saw Brutus. We will never know exactly what passed between them in that instant. Shakespeare's famous words, et tu, Brute, may be poetic invention, but ancient sources agree that Caesar, upon seeing Brutus, ceased to resist. Some say he covered his face with his toga, as if to hide from the betrayal. 23 stab wounds later, the ruler of Rome lay dead at the base of Pompey's statue, a cruel irony, for it was Pompey who had once been Caesar's great rival. Part 5. The Aftermath of Blood. The conspirators emerged into the streets, shouting that the tyrant was dead and the Republic restored. They expected cheers, celebrations, and gratitude. Instead, they were met with silence and fear. The people of Rome loved Caesar. He had given them land, grain, and spectacles. He had forgiven his enemies and brought stability to a fractured republic. To them, Brutus and his allies were not liberators, but murderers. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and master of political theater, delivered a funeral oration that turned public opinion into fury. Holding up Caesar's blood-stained cloak, he recited the names of the conspirators and pointed to the wounds. The crowd rioted. Brutus, once the idealist, now found himself an outlaw. Part 6. Brutus's Flight and Fall. In the days following Caesar's assassination, Rome was no longer the city Brutus had known. He and the other conspirators had expected to step into a role as saviors of the Republic, but instead, they were hunted men. The people's grief for Caesar turned to rage against his killers, and the Senate, terrified of civil unrest, offered no protection. Mark Antony seized control of the narrative. He read Caesar's will aloud to the crowd, revealing that Caesar had left generous gifts of money and land to the citizens of Rome. Every gesture, every word from Antony painted Brutus and Cassius not as patriots, but as butchers who had slain a benefactor. Brutus fled the city with Cassius, retreating to the eastern provinces where they could rally support. But the republic they claimed to defend was dissolving before their eyes. Antony had joined forces with Octavian Caesar's young adopted heir and Marcus Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate. The liberators would not face a trial. They would face an army. Part 7. The Road to Philippi. Brutus was no coward. He was a scholar and a statesman, but when the cause demanded it, he was also a soldier. In the summer of 42 BCE, he and Cassius assembled a massive force in Macedonia to confront the armies of Antony and Octavian. Before the battle, Brutus tried to inspire his troops with speeches about liberty and the ancestral duty to protect Rome from kingship. He believed his cause was just, but the soldiers fighting for Caesar's memory believed theirs was too. The Battle of Philippi came in two engagements. In the first, Brutus's forces pushed back Antony's legions, but on the other side of the battlefield, Cassius's army was crushed. Mistaking the dust and confusion for defeat, Cassius took his own life. With his ally gone, Brutus now commanded alone. Part 8. The Last Stand. The second battle, fought just weeks later, was the end. Antony's troops, hardened by years of campaigning, overpowered Brutus's lines. Surrounded and hopeless, Brutus refused to be taken prisoner. On the 23rd of October, 42 BCE, he retreated to a hilltop with a small group of loyal friends. There he spoke calmly, thanking them for their service. Then, asking one of his companions to hold his sword, Brutus fell upon it. According to Plutarch, his final words were to the effect that he found joy in the fact that no man had been able to accuse him of valuing his own life above the freedom of Rome. Part 9. Patriot or traitor. History has never agreed on the true face of Brutus. To the Romans of his own time, opinion was divided. Some saw him as the last defender of the Republic, others as the ultimate betrayer of trust. Caesar himself had once written, "It is easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience." Perhaps Brutus's greatest flaw was that he believed the Republic could be saved by one dramatic act, when in truth, Rome's transformation into an empire was already inevitable. Was Brutus right? Does it matter? In the end, the Republic he died to protect did not survive. Octavian, later Augustus, would become Rome's first emperor, and the Senate would fade into ceremonial irrelevance. The ideals Brutus cherished became the stuff of speeches and history books, not political reality. Yet his name lives on, not as a mere conspirator, but as a symbol. To some, he is the embodiment of principle over personal loyalty. To others, he is the warning that even the noblest intentions can be tainted by ambition. And somewhere in the shadows of history, on the blood-stained floor of the theater of Pompeii, the question lingers. Was Brutus a savior, or the most infamous traitor the world has ever known?